Welcome back to the Weather Desk. It's good to be with you. We're going to talk about something I think is going to be of interest to a lot of folks here in Hampton Roads. Scientists are keeping an eye on a harmful algal bloom forming in the lower Chesapeake Bay and the York River. Joining us now to talk more about the impacts this could have on the bay, Kimberly Reece, a professor at William & Mary's Virginia Institute for Marine Science and the Batten School. Well, first of all, good morning and thanks for joining us. Let's talk about these algal blooms and what exactly we're looking at here. How are you and what do we have that we're studying here?
Good morning, Craig. Thank you for having me. Yes, algae blooms are these rapid growth of these small plant-like cells in our waterways, and they're called phytoplankton. And the ones that we're seeing starting to grow now happen to be dinoflagellates. And the one that we're following right now in particular is one that has a large name called Margalefidinium polykrikoides, but we call it Marg. That makes it easier to say for everybody. And often at this time of year, we have seen this organism form these blooms in our lower Chesapeake Bay waterways, the rivers like the York River, the James River, Lafayette, Elizabeth, and just the general Hampton Roads area. So we have several colleagues around the area, down at ODU, Margie Mulholland and her group, and several of us here at VIMS, including the Chesapeake Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve Group. They're collecting samples, and many labs here at VIMS in addition, and the Virginia Department of Health. They have a group out collecting samples. So many of us are keeping an eye on this and collecting samples.
Dr. Reece, this is something, these blooms are kind of a natural thing. I mean, they do occur, but why is this one potentially harmful to the bay?
Yes, it could be harmful to the aquatic animals, but this organism in particular is not really known for any human health effects, so that's really important. There are some organisms that cause human health effects, but the organisms that we often see in the late summer here, Margalefidinium or Marg, and Alexandrium monollatum, which often follows the Marg blooms, we call it Alex. So the organism that you're showing there, those look like cyanobacterial blooms, and those are blooms that we often see in fresh waters around the areas. But the blooms that we see in our estuarine or marine waters often are a mahogany or reddish color. And
looks a little bit like spilled paint, kind of.
Right. So they're often called red tides, but they're really, harmful algal blooms that are often in mahogany color, and sometimes people see them as brownish color. And there are ways for people to report this on the Virginia Department of Health's website. At swimhealthyvirginia.gov, there's a form there for people when they see discolored water, even in the fresh waters like the pictures you were showing of those cyanobacterial blooms, or in the rivers or out in the coastal waters. They can report any discolored water that they might see using that form.
Dr. Reece, we saw kind of the stagnant water. A lot of times you'll kind of associate some of that, the blooms are just kind of that greenish kind of, it looks a little slimy if it's stagnant water. In something like the bay where there is movement, what types of conditions generally spawn this type of development? Are there certain times of the year that you really anticipate it, or are there certain conditions that tend to trigger more?
Yes. So there are different organisms that bloom at different kinds of times of the year, depending on the conditions. And right now, the temperatures happen to be elevated, and we've had drought conditions, so the salinity is a little bit higher. So we're seeing these blooms of Margalefidinium or Marg start to form. Now, last week at the beginning of the week, we had some dense patches of Marg, but then we had that smoke from Canada come in, as we all know, and so the sunlight was inhibited getting into the water, as you know. So it's possible that the cells weren't able to grow quite as well toward the end of the week because we didn't have as much sunlight. So we saw some lower cell numbers in the water towards the end of the week. We saw at the beginning of the week, but we'll see what happens this week.
So
that's why we monitor it very carefully.
So to stress again, you mentioned really not a human health standpoint where there's a great risk. Obviously, you wouldn't want to ingest it. I would imagine that would probably tear up your digestive tract a little bit. But for aquatic life, when you get those types of really heavy blooms, that can choke oxygen to some of the water, and that's what makes it harder on marine life. Is that correct?
Well, it's always suggested that you never go in water when it's discolored. If you see discolored water, don't go in it. Now, for the cyanobacterial blooms, that's really important that people stay out of those waterways because many of the those green, that slime, that green, those cyanobacterial blooms, many of them are harmful to human health. There's also on the Swim Healthy Virginia Department of Health's website, a HAB hotline for people to call if they have any questions about human health. There's a number there that they can call.
Okay.
And it's really important that people stay out of any discolored water. If you have any questions, it's important to ask and to use the HAB hotline.
Okay, and that hotline number is 1-888
I'm sorry, I can't hear you right now.
That's okay. I'm passing it along just because it's not on the screen right now. But the number that we have is 1-888-238-6154. So, Dr. Reece, thank you so much for your time this morning. We'll look forward to seeing what you and your colleagues have to say in the coming days. And until this bloom kind of takes place and passes, we'll be waiting to hear more, okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You have a great day.